B5, what's known as the Building Canada Act, is on a fast track to get through the House of Commons by the end of this week. That's the legislative blueprint to break down the federal part of interprovincial trade barriers and accelerate so-called nation-building projects. While the Prime Minister was hosting G7 leaders in Alberta, the Fed's got conservative support to speed its timeline through the House of Commons, clearing the way for it to pass before the scheduled start of summer for MPs, which is Friday. Joining me now on that and what else the Liberals want to get done in their final sitting days in the House is the government's House Leader, Steve MacKinnon. Hi, Minister. It's good to see you. Thank you for making the time. I want to start off on the process of this, because I remember a few weeks ago the Prime Minister saying if this bill needs more time in order to pass, then the House will just sit longer. So why are you rushing it?
Well, we were able to come to an agreement and an arrangement on a procedural path through the House with others in the House of Commons. It represents a significant majority of the members of the House of Commons, and we're having committee hearings as we speak, hearing from witnesses, probably considering amendments brought by others. And so this bill will see passage, if all goes well, by Friday.
But on the question of sort of whether that sort of rush timeline is merited, I know that you're talking about Conservatives who provided their support, who obviously do represent a large portion of Canadians, but we've heard from a lot of other people at the Senate, for example, over just the last 24 hours, because even that is very condensed, particularly Indigenous leaders who feel as though this is a direct affront to them, the speediness with which you want to see this pass.
Well, one thing that we can ensure, we'll be dialoguing with rights holders, with local Indigenous communities, Indigenous nations right across this country. Ministers have fanned out. Many conversations have been had, and many will continue to be had. Remember, too, that there are significant Indigenous nations, communities in this country who want to participate in major projects of national significance. These are opportunities for economic development, for jobs in many of those places. So there are people who are really advocating for this bill. But overall, Vashi, what I will say is this is what we got elected on. Page 1 of our platform begins to talk about dismantling these interprovincial trade barriers that hold back our economy, hold back people from being able to take their trades or their professions from coast to coast to coast into different jurisdictions, and accelerates the consideration of major national projects. These projects will be trade enabling. They will be expansions of our ability to trade with other nations. They will, of themselves, ignite further growth in this country. People, you know, people who watch us, they get very cynical about our ability to execute these projects. This is the government's response to that. This is our response to the tariff threat from south of the border. We have an economic imperative. We have to accelerate growth in Canada, and this is an exciting way to get at that.
If they're frustrated or cynical, I mean, it's based on processes that your party, when it was in government for the last 10 years, put in place. And my question with respect wasn't about the...
To be fair, they're based on processes that have grown, indeed, over years and across governments.
I mean, the Impact Assessment Act was your government's process.
Many times overlapping at the federal level, and then they themselves overlapping with provincial regulations and provincial assessments. So it is important to disentangle those. We cannot sit here and say every regulation in every jurisdiction, in every field in the country is perfect. And so this is the government saying...
Sure, but I was, to be fair, by members of cabinet over the last 5 years, I was expressly on multiple occasions told just that the Impact Assessment Act allowed for the building of big projects in an expedited manner. And now you're conceding with the introduction of this that was not the case.
Well, it has enabled projects, but it's too slow. It takes too long. These are complicated projects. Indeed, they merit rigorous assessment. They will continue to get rigorous assessment. There will continue to need to be prior and informed consent from Indigenous nations. We will continue to protect the environment. None of that is sacrificed. However, we will be accelerating these projects. This is important. Canadians are demanding this, and this is our response to that.
So my question to you on that is, how is that possible? How are you going to continue, for example, to adhere to the duty to consult free and prior informed consent, plus environmental considerations? How are you going to do all of that and expedite the process to get it built? Because how I understand the bill is, if something gets on this list, it is approved. The onus has shifted. It's de facto approved, and then the conditions are established thereafter. But there's also stuff set out in this bill that says the minister can, in charge of it, can say, I don't want that condition.
This is meant to elevate projects of national significance, projects that will have been identified after a process of consulting with Indigenous peoples, consulting with all the premiers in the 13 provinces and territories. So by definition, they will be exceptional projects, growth-spurring projects. Over the longer term, the government has an ambition and a commitment to make this process go quicker for all projects so that we can aspire to growth in this country, so that we can aspire to build things that will, yes, make more dynamic economies in Indigenous nations, make more possible diversifying our trade. These are good things, Vashi, and we should be celebrating that this government is pivoting to achieving that economic growth that I think Canadians all know, certainly the government does, that we need.
I think, though, scrutinizing the way or the manner in which your government intends to do that does not mean that someone is saying we shouldn't have economic growth. There are very valid voices from Indigenous leaders who testified, right?
Yep.
These are not people who are saying we don't want economic growth or we disagree with what the government is pitching as far as their ambition. They're simply saying you're ignoring our voices in drafting this bill.
Well, that couldn't be more. That could not be more incorrect.
You've given them 24 hours to submit their feedback.
This is framework legislation. When the rubber hits the road will be when projects are identified, then they come forward. And yes, there will be a responsibility to consult with impacted Indigenous nations. There will be an essential part of the process to consult with provinces. And obviously, private investors, unions, and others will have to bring forward these projects. So we're not out of the woods yet, so to speak, but we have found a path to get national projects, significant projects, projects that will put skilled tradespeople to work, and projects that will help grow our economy done more quickly.
So what happens if an Indigenous group, let's say along the pathway of whatever the project is, comes back with a certain number of conditions, or the Department of Environment and Climate Change comes back with environmental conditions? I read the legislation as allowing the minister in charge to say, hey, actually, that condition I don't agree with, so I'm not going to include it. Doesn't that just get this whole thing stuck back in court, and it's not Build Canada anymore, it's just Build Canada back in court? Well,
it's hard to deal with a hypothetical, but what I will say is that this is meant to streamline that process so that instead of having several ministers, and in some cases overlapping provincial and federal assessments going on simultaneously or even sequentially, which we have seen, what we're going to do is make sure there's a minister who shepherds these processes through and is able to move these things along, yes, in parallel, so that we can get to a quicker outcome and a quicker result. In some cases, these projects may not pass muster, but we're hoping that we can get to a yes or a no much more quickly.
But you are getting to a yes or no very quickly, because the bill designs a system in which the onus is shifted. It's not like we spend years laying out the conditions for approval and then say something is approved. If it gets on this list, this bill says that it's approved de facto, and then the conditions are set. So aren't you misrepresenting it?
No, I'm not misrepresenting it at all. We said clearly in the election campaign, we're going to get national projects, economic enabling projects, growth projects for this country done more quickly, and this is how.
But how do you do that without basically ignoring some of the things that protect the environment or inform a duty to consult, or how do you?
Actually,
I don't understand.
It does not sacrifice environmental standards or our constitutional.
But it can. A minister can. That's the power it affords a minister.
It does not sacrifice any of those things to try and do this more quickly. We cannot sit back here. We do not have the luxury of sitting back here and saying every timeline of every regulation in every level of government is just perfect, and we're going to wait and let investors wait and let working men and women wait while we go through years and years and years of assessments in these projects. We think we're an advanced society. We have advanced assessment abilities. We're going to do that more quickly, and we're going to get to projects. This is very exciting legislation.
And I'm not framing this against the backdrop of, like, I don't want to see economic growth, right? Or I don't want projects to get built. Clearly, I spent the last number of years questioning your government on repeated occasions about why the legislation that was in place wasn't allowing for that to be the case.
Right.
But ultimately, a lot of these projects don't end up getting built because they end up in court, because environmental groups or Indigenous, First Nations or Indigenous leaders say that the conditions that would have allowed for it to be built out have not been adhered adhered to. I don't understand what is in this legislation that will not see these projects end up back in court, because ultimately you have afforded to a minister powers that cabinet or the minister did not have before in saying, I disagree with that condition, I'm not going to have it.
Well, you saw under Mr. Harper's government projects end up in court. Indeed, people, we have a free and open system of justice in this country. This process streamlines all of those approvals and all of those assessments, gets us to a yes or a no more quickly, or in most cases, gets us to the conditions that are meant to assuage the very concerns that are brought up by Indigenous peoples, by environmental groups, by other proponents, by neighboring communities, and what have you. We're going to get to through these processes more quickly. What does that do? That gets investment dollars off the sidelines and investing into our communities. That gets men and women in our skilled trades back to work, building this kind of infrastructure. These are good things.
Very quickly, I know your time is limited. I just wanted to ask, if this bill does pass, as it seems like it will, the House by the end of the week, how soon would a project end up on the list? Like, how soon can Canadians expect the first of these projects deemed in the national interest to be on that approved list?
Well, it has to go through the Senate, so I don't want to overlook that.
Once that happens,
that part of the legislative process, but there will be a major projects office. They will begin considering those projects.
So how soon, though, can a project appear on that list? For Canadians, you just laid out why you believe there is a massive economic imperative to this. So for Canadians watching right now, how soon will they see a project on that list and therefore...
Well, the goal is to go quickly, so we hope soon.
So before the end of the year?
Well, I'm not going to speculate on individual projects. Remember, these are projects that will be brought forward by various proponents, in some cases investors, in some cases companies, in some cases Indigenous communities may bring forward some of these projects. And when they do, they will enter into this accelerated process, and we will keep those safeguards in place, but we'll get to job creation and growth in this country much more quickly.
Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note. Minister, a pleasure as always. Thank you for taking the time. I appreciate it.